On the phones, our next guest, State Representative Dustin Burrows. Good afternoon, Representative Burrows. How are you today?
Chad, I'm great. Thank you for having me on this evening.
Absolutely. Glad to have you on the program. You got to watch or listen to the governor's State of the State address last night. What'd you think about what the governor had to say?
Chad, you look at it, and this has been an unprecedented challenge that we've faced. We have a lot of people who are still hurting, whether it's because their business experienced significant loss or they lost a loved one during this crisis. But I think the governor laid out a clear vision about the strength of our economy and our resilience and how we're actually doing. And the metrics and the recovery look like we are doing well. He laid out a lot of priorities that I think are good for West Texas, good for conservatives, and things that I look very forward to working with him and supporting in this next legislative session.
Which of the emergency items, did you agree with all the emergency items that he had put out there? And what in particular do you think that will be expanded on maybe first?
Yeah, so I think all of them are very good emergency items. Obviously you saw election integrity on there, and what we've seen happening around the country tells us that we deserve fair, good, legitimate outcomes and restoring the confidence in the election system. So I think that's going to be a top priority and something that we'll tackle early on. Rural broadband, infrastructure at this point in time, the way it's been utilized. And so for this area, for Lubbock, for Waco, for, Wichita Falls, for Abilene, for West Texas, East Texas, everywhere around, you need rural broadband. So I'm excited about that initiative. And then maybe a little more close to home when he talked about some of the reforms that we're looking for, some of the protections, our First Amendment right to worship. One of the most important things, making sure that churches can never be closed by government, gun stores. Two things that we actually saw right here in our own backyard, the city of Lubbock closed down. So I was happy to see that, he talked about those things last night, making Texas a Second Amendment sanctuary and doing a bunch of good things on pro-life. So things that I'm excited about working with him on.
Well, okay, let me ask you about first rural broadband. Is this something that could be potentially, it may sound good, and it may sound good out here. There are also a lot of lawmakers in Dallas and Houston who may not really care about rural broadband. How does this play inside the legislature, and is this something that is really going to be easy to get through when, the power is not necessarily in the rural areas?
Well, it's early in session. It's probably easier to ask me in March or April about where things stand and actually what it looks like in getting things through. But, it's one of the things about the Texas legislature is we do work together. Even though there's issues that may not affect, our area, we realize that, the entire state does well when we all benefit. I expect that we're going to have a lot of urban lawmakers who I've seen tweet about this and talk about this that will end up being supportive even if, it's not really an urban issue.
Were you surprised the governor did not bring up a ban on taxpayer-funded lobbying?
Well, I think at the end of the day, we're going to put one on his desk, and I think that he'll be supportive of it. You and I both know that really for, well over, I don't know how long it's been, I've been very supportive of this policy. And there's two main tenets of the ban on taxpayer-funded lobbying that I want to see achieved. Number one is a transparency component, Chad, that I want to make sure that if you have your tax dollars being spent to advocate for or against bills or ideas or concepts, that everybody knows about it. And if somebody tries to hide that fact or obscure it, there's actual penalties and teeth in enforcing that it gets drug out. And then the second one is I want to make sure that, we don't have our local tax dollars just basically being given to, high-powered lobbyists to recycle and given to campaign coffers, usually of anti-conservative candidates. And I think that's kind of a problem, and I want to see that stopped. And so I think that when people really start to unpackage what it is, we'll get that through and put it on the governor's desk, and I think they'll be supportive of it.
You know him better than I do. Where's the speaker stand on a ban on taxpayer-funded lobbying?
Well, I would dare not speak for the Speaker of the Texas House, but I will tell you we had a bill last session that Representative Middleton carried, and there's only 4 people who can be joint authors of any bill, and that's the one that we talked about, and both the current Speaker and myself were 2 of those 4 JAs.
Okay. When it comes to this, and the governor brought it up again last night, Texas as a Second Amendment sanctuary state. What have you heard as far as what that means? And one thing that I keep getting from listeners is constitutional carry. We really haven't heard the governor go into specifics on that. What have you heard that looks like as far as Texas being a Second Amendment sanctuary state?
Yeah. So, Chad, I think the thing that the governor's office is wanting to do is kind of build a wall around Texas for our freedoms. As we watch this federal government, go to, trying to do a lot of things, especially on the Second Amendment, is, try and protect that. So if, this president comes and tries to ban certain firearms or even take them or confiscate them, make sure that we have a directive that we're not going to put any of our state resources to enforce those, that we cannot be compelled to do that. And that's a constitutional way of doing it, making sure that, if they try to have forced registries that we don't agree with, that we're not going to have any state resources or any dollars whatsoever and fight back and try to push back, which I think we're going to see. This federal government is going to be really, really against our right of self-protection. That's which is enshrined in the Second Amendment. So the governor and his idea of having a sanctuary for the Second Amendment is to put in place some things to make sure that we're not going to enforce any of those things that we believe clearly violate the Second Amendment.
Visiting with State Representative Dustin Burrows here on the Chad Hasty Show. We had one listener who I know it's like you mentioned earlier that it's early to say where these bills may be, but they wanted to know what you think the chances are of taxpayer-funded lobbying passing in this session.
I think they're very good. I think that we have seen people realize that it's not only good policy, but it is popular. I think it was a ballot initiative for Republicans across the entire state to ask what they thought about a ban on taxpayer-funded lobbying. And it was somewhere between 90 and 95% of all Republicans voted for that. They don't want to see their tax dollars wasted on whining and dining lobbyists or legislators. They don't want to see those tax dollars spent against property tax reform. They don't want to see those tax dollars spent against our, police. Governor Abbott made a really, really important priority of his is making sure that we are pro-law enforcement, something that, Chad, you and your listeners know that every session I have put as some of my top legislative priorities. So I was very proud that, stopping cities from defunding the police and wanting to become like Portland or Seattle or some of these other places, or, Austin's on its path to trying to do that. So, again, I think that the ban on taxpayer-funded lobbying has a really good chance of passing because people do want to back the blue, and I know that everybody wants to do that as well.
Yeah. What is bail reform? What do you think that may look like during this session?
Yeah, so that's the Damon Allen Act, and the governor has talked about that we know that there's some people that are allowed to go out on bail that shouldn't be, and bad things happen. I think one of the overarching messages last night is public safety, pro-law enforcement, making sure that, our borders are secure, making sure that we don't have, criminals and chaos and crime on our streets. And I think part of that idea and part of that strategy is to make sure that we're not releasing people who don't need to be out there. And at the same token, I think that there probably are some people that are not a threat, clearly not a threat, that, perhaps we could actually work with them better to get them back into a paying job.
Yeah. Visiting with State Representative Dustin Burrows here on the Chad Hasty Show, another listener who brought up election integrity. Do you think when the governor brought that up as an emergency item, election integrity, this listener wanted to know if this is going to be, maybe changing the way Texas votes, or how do you see that working?
No, I think that the one thing that we're going to have to do is, look not only what happened in this last election cycle in Texas, but around the country, and do things to make sure that nobody can try to game our system like we did see in other places. Whether that means taking a look at our voter rolls to make sure that the people who are listed as eligible voters are actually alive, Chad, here legally, citizens, things of that nature, that, they're the only ones who are actually on the voter rolls, making sure that these mail-in ballots, that there's more secure, making sure that these local governments, even if they try to use, pandemic powers, can't, change our election laws, so that we have a fair, free elections, that people can have confidence that that's actually what occurred.
Yeah. Before I let you go, the governor at one point said that he was going to continue to work with the legislature on the pandemic, and I don't have the quote right in front of me, but basically to make sure businesses don't shut down again. And I'm sure some eyebrows were raised because I saw quite a few comments other than mine on Twitter going, wait a minute, he was working with the legislature on this? Because I heard from a lot of your colleagues that they never felt as though they were really brought in on the process. What do you think that was about, and how do you think this is this issue and maybe reining in the powers of the governor, how do you think that's going to work during this session?
Chad, there is no way that we can go through some sort of experience like this and not realize that we need to have a robust, thorough debate about all the things that we should have done differently and the things that we want to do if we actually encounter this situation again. I believe the governor, in his statements last night and the statements I've heard, is committed to having to taking a look at that and being part of what we actually want to get together and have that debate and come up with the process that we agree with. I also want to remind you, a lot of the things that I saw, also was at the local level, not just, in other parts of the state, but even here in my backyard in Lubbock. Again, I'll remind you, when the city of Lubbock closed down both churches and gun stores and continue to try to do things, we shouldn't turn those types of powers over ever, no matter what. Churches have a historic and important part of being for people when they need them the most, and the pandemic is most of that time. So we're going to work to create legislation based on our shared experiences that we've had to make sure if we ever encounter another situation like this, that we take the things that we got right and that they're enshrined, and the things that we wish we'd done differently don't happen again.
State Representative Dustin Burrows, House District 83, always a pleasure to visit with you, and I'm sure we'll be visiting quite a bit once things really get popping down in Austin.
Thanks, Chad. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. That's State Representative Dustin Burrows here on the Chad Hasty Show.